They found Ch.8 at dawn, sitting where he had fallen when the obsidian shattered, and Kofi recognized in him the thing he feared most about himself. The chamber floor was littered with fragments of the third skin, black shards that had been half his face, half his body, half his identity for 20 years. The shards were inert, dead. Without the corruption to sustain them, they were just obsidian, volcanic glass, sharp and beautiful and ordinary. The living component was gone, reclaimed by the reunified system. Ch.8 sat among the shells with the specific stillness of a man stripped of something so fundamental that movement seemed presumptuous. He was not injured. The obsidian had separated from his flesh the way ice separates from water, a phase transition, not a rupture. His face was whole, both cheeks flesh, both eyes brown. He looked older than 50. The third skin's absence revealed 20 years of concealed erosion, lines the obsidian had smoothed. Fatigue, the stone's energy, had compensated for. Kofi lowered himself to the floor across from Ch.8. His knee ground bone on bone, the cartilage gone, the joint's architecture collapsed. The pain was a bright, specific thing that he was learning to carry the way a soldier learns to carry a heavy pack, not by ignoring it, but by incorporating it into every step, every thought, every breath. He would need a cane. Eventually. For now, he had the wall and the floor and the willingness to sit. The two men faced each other across the dais, where the leopard skin glowed with the amber frequency of a legitimate bond. Between them, obsidian fragments caught the dawn light slanting through the ventilation shafts. The air smelled of stone dust and the faint, acrid sweetness of magical residue, the scent of the corruption's dissipation, not unlike the smell of a brush fire after the rain puts it out.
I was right, you know.
Ch.8 said. His voice was all human, no harmonic. Just a tired man in his 50s who sounded as though he had not slept in 20 years and had only just realized it.
About the problem.
Kofi said.
You were right about the problem.
Ch.8's jaw tightened.
But you were wrong about the solution.
The word landed. Ch.8 did not flinch, but something behind his eyes shifted, the recalculation of a man who had been running the same equation for 2 decades and was now being asked to check his arithmetic.
Concentration was the only viable path.
Ch.8 said.
You completed the protocol, you have the unified knowledge, you can see the factions, their inertia, their proprietary claims, their refusal to share. They would never have agreed to voluntary reunification.
No, they would not have.
Then what was the alternative? Waiting, hoping, the system was dying, the root lines were poisoned, the encoding was corrupted, the enskinment was consuming candidates. Waiting would have meant 7 more years of decay, another alignment without intervention. The groves would have gone dark, not 4 but 40. The guardians would have exhausted their capacity to filter the corruption. Within a generation, the system would have collapsed entirely.
You are not wrong about any of that.
Ch.8 stared at him.
Then what?
Then the alternative is not concentration, it is cooperation, which is harder, which takes longer, which requires trusting people who have not earned your trust and may never deserve it. The factions are resistant, they are proprietary, they are selfish with gifts that were never theirs to hoard, all true. And the answer to all of that is not to bypass them, it is to outlast them.
The system could not wait.
The system waited 1,000 years. It could have waited longer, not because the decay did not matter, because the cure had to be legitimate, had to come through the fragments cooperating, not through one man forcing cooperation by concentrating all 4 fragments in his own body.
Kofi leaned forward. His knee screamed. He breathed through it.
The convergence worked not because we were powerful. It worked because we cooperated. 4 custodians, each with a fragment, each responsible for one piece, each trusting the others to hold their piece while the whole assembled itself. You could not replicate that through concentration. Concentration bypasses trust, and without trust, the system you build is a cage. Your cage.
Ch.8 was quiet for a long time.
You are asking me,
he said,
whether I will accept that 20 years of work, 20 years of sacrifice, of studying the system, of building the third skin, of consuming 7 candidates' life force to sustain the corruption, were wasted.
I am asking whether you will accept that they were wrong.
The distinction was precise, and Kofi saw it land. Wasted implied the work had no value. Wrong implied the work had value but had been aimed at the wrong target. Tohage's understanding of the system, his deep, precise, dangerous understanding, was not wasted. It was misdirected.
The 4 custodians.
Tohage said,
They will need oversight.
Yes.
Factions will try to corrupt them. Political pressure will compromise their independence. Institutional loyalty will override their commitment to the system.
Yes.
You will need someone who understands how concentration corrupts. Someone who can identify the early signs, the subtle shifts in fragment frequency that indicate unauthorized accumulation, the diagnostic anomalies that precede a corruption event.
Kofi waited.
You are describing my skill set.
Tohage said,
I am describing your experience. You built a third skin that connected all 4 fragments. You designed a trap that exploited the failsafe's mechanics. You understand how the system can be attacked because you are the person who attacked it.
You want me to guard against the thing I was.
I want you to maintain the system you understand better than almost anyone alive. Not as a custodian, as an auditor. The person who watches the custodians and raises the alarm if any of them begins to do what you did.
Tohage's face did something complicated. Kofi watched it with the reformed mind's analytical precision and the scavenger's gut-level reading of human emotion. The expression was not gratitude. Tohage was too proud for that. Not relief. The loss of the third skin was too fresh, too raw, too much like an amputation for relief. It was the expression of a man being offered a purpose, after having the only purpose he had ever known ripped from his body, and scattered across a stone floor in fragments of dead obsidian. It was dangerous. Kofi knew that. Offering oversight access to the man who had built the cage was not a safe play. It was a gamble, the specific gamble of a scavenger who had survived by reading people accurately and betting on the reading. Tohage could accept the role and use it to rebuild his power base. Could use the oversight position as a new form of concentration, a panopticon instead of a cage, but control nonetheless.
If I accept,
Tohage said carefully,
I need you to understand what you are giving me. You are giving the man who built the cage the keys to the surveillance system. The man who proved he would compromise everything for his vision of what the system needed. You are trusting me.
I am gambling on you. Trust takes longer.
Tohage almost smiled. The expression was strange on his fully human face, the muscles unpracticed, the skin unused to expressing humor without the obsidian's mineral precision mediating the gesture.
That is more honest than I expected.
I am a scavenger. Scavengers are honest about their odds.
And what are the odds?
Kofi considered.
60-40. In your favor. You spent 20 years building a cage because you believed the system needed saving. You were right about the need, wrong about the method. The need has not changed. The method now has. I am betting that the conviction that drove you, the genuine, bone-deep conviction that the system matters and must be protected, survives the loss of the method. That you care more about the system's survival than about being the one who saves it.
And if you are wrong?
If I am wrong, the other 3 custodians will detect the corruption through the diagnostic channels the reunification restored. The shadow binding reads the system's boundary. The communion reads the root lines. The encoding reads the pattern network. 3 independent monitoring systems, each reporting on the health of the whole. You could fool 1, possibly 2, not 3 simultaneously. The distributed architecture is its own defense.
Tohage stared at him. The stare held calculation, assessment, the specific intelligence that had understood the system deeply enough to exploit it. Kofi held it. The scavenger's eyes and the candidate's reformed mind, steady against the cage maker's scrutiny.
I am willing.
Tohage said. 2 words. Small. carrying the weight of a man who had spent 20 years trying to become a god and was now, on a stone floor among the fragments of his ambition, agreeing to become a servant. Kofi extended his hand, not the formal gesture of a system fragment seeking connection, the ordinary human gesture of one person reaching toward another across a divide. His hand was calloused from 14 months of scavenging. Ch.8's was smooth. The obsidian had preserved everything. They clasped hands across the dais. No frequencies interlocked. No fragments connected. No ancestral voices hummed approval. It was a human event, two men, one marginal and one broken, agreeing to build something neither could build alone. A future that did not require perfection or concentration. A future that required only the willingness to maintain what others had built, together, with the honest acknowledgement that maintaining was harder than building and infinitely harder than breaking. Kofi released the handshake and leaned back against the wall. His knee throbbed, the steady, grinding ache that would be his companion for the rest of his life. He probed the joint carefully. The damage was structural. The cartilage was gone. He could feel the femur pressing against the tibia without cushion, the bone surfaces grinding with every shift of weight. Walking would be painful. Running was finished. The protocol had rebuilt his mind into the most sophisticated consciousness the system had ever produced, and his body remained what it had always been, the marginal candidate's burden. The physical reminder that the reformed mind's vast knowledge was housed in flesh that did not measure up. He would need a cane within weeks, a brace within months. He would walk with pain for the rest of his life, and the pain would remind him, every step, every staircase, every morning when the knee protested the simple act of rising, that conducting the convergence had cost his body what his mind had gained. The protocol's final lesson, power costs flesh. The mind survives, the body remembers.
Help me up,
Kofi said again to Zara. She had been standing at the chamber's edge, watching the exchange between the conductor and the cage maker with the expression of a woman who had sealed this knowledge for 43 years and was now watching it reshape the world she had been afraid to change. She helped him. He leaned on her shoulder, the old woman and the scavenger, neither of them steady, both of them stubborn.
We need to talk about the custodian network.
Kofi said.
Structure, communication protocols, oversight mechanisms.
He glanced at Ch.8.
All of it, before the factions reorganize and start trying to reclaim their fragments.
The factions are already moving.
Zara said.
The Kambonaba told me before dawn, the Ashvale Order, the Damba Collective, the Western Chieftaincies. Everyone felt the convergence. Everyone wants answers.
Then we had better have answers.
He limped toward the stairs. Ch.8 rose from the floor, slowly, the way a man rises after sitting for a very long time, stiff and uncertain and diminished. The former cage maker fell into step beside the conductor, and Kofi noticed that Ch.8 walked slightly behind him. Not subservience. Deference. The specific positioning of a man who had been given a role and was already inhabiting it, the auditor behind the conductor, watching, assessing, the eyes that had seen the system's darkest vulnerability, now pointed outward instead of inward. It was a beginning. Fragile, dangerous, built on a 60-40 gamble and a handshake between a man with a ruined knee and a man with the ruins of an empire scattered on the floor behind him. The morning light reached the bottom of the ceremonial stairs. The system hummed clean above them. The fragments were connected. The cage was broken. And two men who had both been called inadequate by the institutions that should have valued them began to climb the stairs toward a world that would test every assumption they had made about each other and about themselves. Kofi climbed slowly. His knee ground with every step. He did not stop. The system was never meant for the powerful. It was meant for the faithful. And faithful meant showing up. Every day, with whatever body you had, with whatever damage you carried. With the honest, stubborn, marginal commitment to doing the work that needed doing, not because you were the best person for the job, but because you were the person who was here. Kofi was here, his knee was ruined, his mind was clear. And the work, the real work, the work that came after the music stopped, and the cage broke, and the convergence settled into the long, slow, unglamorous maintenance that would determine whether the reunification survived its first year. The work was just beginning.